I remember the moment as if it were carved into stone, the weight of it pressing down on me even as I stood there in heels that pinched, and a dress I had borrowed because I wanted to look like someone worth celebrating. I was 28, finally finishing my MBA after years of working two jobs, living on cheap instant noodles, patching the soles of my shoes because every dollar counted. My family had never once thrown me a party for anything I achieved. When I won the spelling bee at 10, my father shrugged. When I landed a full scholarship, my mother said only that I should not brag. My brother Daniel, the golden child, could skip classes, fail exams, crash cars, and still he was praised. But that day, I thought things were different. The living room was dressed in silver and navy streamers, candles flickering, a huge banner stretched across the wall with my name written in bold letters. There were real plates, not paper trays of catered food, not greasy pizza boxes. My father's colleagues filled the space. Neighbors I barely knew clapped when I entered, and for the first time in my life, I allowed myself to believe I mattered. My mother hugged me, her eyes shiny as if she were proud. My father clapped me on the back, telling everyone loudly that I was the first in the family to graduate college, the first to earn a master's degree. I felt a lump rise in my throat. For once, I was not invisible. I scanned the room and saw Daniel in the corner scrolling his phone uninterested, but even that did not sting because this was supposed to be my night. Glasses clinked, voices rose, someone toasted me, and I smiled so hard my cheeks hurt. Then my mother appeared carrying a cake. It was large white with blue trim, the kind you special order days in advance. She placed it down in front of me as my father winked and told me to check it out. I leaned closer, my heart fluttering. The frosting gleamed under the lights, my name piped in cursive at the top, and then I saw the full line written across it. "Congratulations, failure!" The word punched me in the gut, sharp and merciless. Laughter erupted. My father roared, slapping his knee as if he had just heard the best joke in years. My mother tried to hide her giggle behind her hand, but her shoulders shook. Daniel nearly collapsed onto the couch, tears streaming down his face, pointing at me. Guests looked away. Some gave awkward chuckles. No one stopped it. No one defended me. My chest tightened. My ears rang. The ground beneath me felt like it was sliding. This was not a mistake, not a typo. It was deliberate. They had spent money, time, effort not to honor me, but to humiliate me in front of everyone. My father leaned close and said, "Lighten up, Laura. It is just a joke." Daniel sneered, calling out that I would always be second place, always behind him. I stared at them, my face burning, my hands trembling, but my voice when it came was calm, steadier than I expected. I lifted my glass, forcing a smile that cut sharper than a knife. "To all of you," I said, "for always being exactly who I thought you were." The laughter faltered. The room shifted uneasily. I gestured at the decorations, the banner, the cake. So much effort, so much thought, I will never forget it. And then I raised the glass a little higher, my eyes meeting my father's, my mother's, my brother's. And to the future, because now I finally know how to treat you the way you have always treated me. Silence dropped heavy across the room, awkward and suffocating. My father's smile twitched. My mother shifted. Daniel's smirk thinned. I downed the drink in one swallow, set the glass down carefully, and picked up my bag. I turned toward the door, my heels clicking against the hardwood, the sound echoing like a gavel. Behind me, my father barked that I should not be dramatic, that it was just a cake. My mother's voice trembled, trying to smooth it over. Daniel muttered "loser" under his breath one more time. But I did not stop, did not cry, did not plead. I walked out into the night, the air cool and sharp against my skin, my chest rising with a strange clarity. Their laughter still rang behind me, a cruel chorus, but inside me something shifted. It was not just hurt anymore. It was decision. It was the line between the girl who endured and the woman who would no longer bend. That was the night I realized the word on the cake was not prophecy. It was a challenge. And I would make sure they remembered the taste of it long after the frosting was gone. When I stepped into the cool night air after the cake humiliation, I kept walking without looking back, but my mind was already spiraling through the years that had led me there. The truth was that the word scrawled in blue frosting was not new, not even surprising. It was simply the latest chapter in a book that had been written since the day I was born. My family had always believed that sons carried the weight. Daughters were just shadows. My father, Robert Bennett, grew up in a household where boys were raised like kings and girls were expected to serve. He carried that belief into our home, sharpening it into a rule. From as early as I can remember, my older brother Daniel was paraded as the pride of the family. When he scribbled with crayons, my father called him an artist. When he played Little League, even if he struck out, the entire family went out for ice cream to celebrate his effort. I, on the other hand, was told to help clean up, to stay quiet, to be supportive. At 7 years old, I brought home a certificate from school, having won the spelling bee out of the entire district. I remember clutching it, heart-pounding, ready to show my parents. My mother glanced at it while stirring pasta sauce and said, "That's nice, dear, don't brag." My father didn't even look up from his newspaper. That same week, Daniel brought home a messy drawing of a car. It was crooked, lopsided, and colored outside the lines. My father pinned it proudly to the fridge and told every neighbor that Daniel had talent. The message to me was clear. Girls could try, but boys were special. High school only made it worse. I studied late into the night, earning top grades, winning science fairs, getting invited to speak at the regional academic showcase. My father dismissed it. He would say, "Education is fine, but one day you will marry, and then it won't matter." Daniel, meanwhile, barely scraped through his classes. When teachers complained, my parents accused the school of being biased, claimed he was misunderstood. Once, when he got into a fight and nearly got expelled, my father smoothed it over with the principal by calling Daniel a boy with spirit. When I tried to defend myself against the constant dismissal, my mother's answer was always the same. "Don't cause conflict, Laura. Family harmony matters more than your feelings." College should have been my freedom. I earned a full scholarship out of state, packed my bags, and told myself I would prove them wrong. My father barely noticed, grumbling only about who would help with chores now. Daniel flunked out of his first college semester, but came home to applause as though simply attending made him noble. I worked 3 jobs during those years, campus library tutoring, late shifts at a diner. I sent money home more than once because my parents claimed bills were piling up. They never admitted it was to cover Daniel's endless mistakes, his car payments, his bar tabs. By the time I reached graduate school, I had stopped expecting any recognition. Still deep down, a part of me hoped that if I just kept achieving, kept excelling one day, they would look at me and see value. I earned an MBA scholarship, worked on high-profile internships, landed job interviews with Fortune 500 companies. Daniel bounced from failed business idea to failed business idea, each one funded by my father, who borrowed against his own retirement fund, who pushed my mother to cash out her small inheritance. And still, when relatives came by, my parents would beam and talk about Daniel's entrepreneurial spirit while I sat quietly at the edge of the table. I cannot count the number of times I heard the same phrases. "Daniel will carry the family name. Daniel will take care of us when we're older. Daniel is our hope." And me, I was told to learn to cook better, to remember that no matter how much I studied, my place was to support, to endure. My success was treated as a curiosity at best, a nuisance at worst. They asked me to co-sign Daniel's loans because he needs your credit score, you don't need it. They demanded I help him with applications, essays, taxes. Every time I hesitated, my father would snap that family comes first. But the truth was, in our family meant Daniel. The night of the graduation party with the cake shouting failure in front of strangers was not an isolated cruelty. It was the embodiment of years of being silenced, minimized, sacrificed. They thought they could turn my milestone into another comedy routine, that I would swallow the insult as always keep smiling, keep helping, keep disappearing. They did not realize that something in me had hardened long ago. I had learned to nod to endure, but I had also learned how the world worked. I knew about credit, about contracts, about the law, and I knew that my patience had an end. As I walked away from that party, my mind replayed all the times they had used me, the forged signature, when I was too young to understand the pressure to give Daniel money, the shame of being ignored in my own house. Every slight sharpened the decision forming in me. I would not shout, I would not cry. I would show them. I would let their own cruelty rebound on them until they finally felt the weight of what they had done. I barely slept that night after the party. The laughter kept echoing in my head, the sound of Daniel's wheeze as he bent double, pointing at me, the sight of my father's colleagues chuckling as if they were in on some harmless prank. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother just after midnight. "You know your father didn't mean it. Don't ruin the mood for Daniel." That was the final twist of the knife. My humiliation had been for Daniel's amusement, and even afterward their concern was not for me, but for preserving his comfort. The next morning, I dragged myself to the kitchen of my small apartment, coffee in hand, and opened my laptop. My inbox was crowded with congratulatory notes from professors' job offers pending interviews and one letter confirming I had been accepted into a leadership program overseas. On paper, my life was rising higher than I had ever dreamed. But inside, I was raw, stripped, bleeding. I stared at the email subject lines, words like congratulations and well-deserved, and all I could think of was that blue frosting word, failure, smeared across white icing, everyone laughing. By noon, I drove back to my parents' house. I told myself I was only going to pick up some childhood books I had left in the attic, but the truth was darker. I wanted to see them again, to face them in daylight, to understand whether they had any regret. The driveway was cluttered with Daniel's car music blaring through the windows. Inside, the house smelled of bacon grease and stale coffee. My father sat at the table reading the sports page, my mother at the sink, Daniel stretched out on the couch like a prince. "Well," my father said without looking up, "if it isn't our graduate." The word graduate came out dripping with sarcasm. Daniel snickered. My mother turned and gave me a thin smile. "We didn't think you'd sulk this long," she said. "It was just a cake. You need to learn to take a joke." I felt my chest burn, but I kept my tone steady. A joke is when everyone laughs together. Last night, I was the only one on the other side. Daniel rolled his eyes. "Oh, please. You should be grateful we even threw you a party. Most people wouldn't waste money on someone who just hides behind books." The room went quiet for a moment, tension humming like an exposed wire. Then my father chuckled low and dismissive. "Don't get dramatic, Laura. You've always been too sensitive." It was the same refrain I had heard my entire life. Sensitive, dramatic, ungrateful. Words meant to crush me into silence. But this time, something inside me locked into place. I realized they were never going to change. They would never see me as anything but an accessory to Daniel's spotlight. And if I let them, they would keep draining me, keep using me, keep laughing. I looked directly at my father, then at Daniel, then at my mother. "You want to talk about gratitude? I've signed Daniel's loans. I've sent money home. I've carried this family on my back while you pretended he was your future. Last night wasn't a joke, it was proof. Proof that no matter what I do, you'll always see me as less." Daniel smirked, leaning forward. "Then stop whining and keep helping. You're good at that. Playing second place." His words snapped the last thread. I felt an icy calm wash over me. My humiliation was no longer something to swallow. It was fuel. It was clarity. In that moment, I knew exactly what I would do. I would stop being their silent support. I would cut the strings they tied around my wrists. And when the scaffolding of lies and favoritism collapsed, I would let them choke on the dust. I stood pushing the chair back slowly. "You think last night was funny?" I said. "I'm glad, because it will be the last laugh you ever have at my expense." My mother's face tightened as if she heard something different in my tone this time. My father waved a hand, muttering that I was being ridiculous. Daniel laughed again, but there was a flicker in his eyes, hesitation, maybe fear, because he had never seen me this steady, this unshaken. I walked toward the door, pausing only once. "You've called me a failure my whole life," I said softly. "But I promise you when I'm done you'll remember exactly who failed who." The door clicked shut behind me. The sunlight outside was blinding, but it felt like something new, like air rushing into a cave. I gripped my keys so tight the edges bit into my skin, but I didn't mind. Pain meant I was awake. Pain meant I was moving. That was the turning point. That was when humiliation transformed into resolve. For 28 years, I had tried to earn their love. Now I would earn my freedom. And in the process, I would make sure Daniel's pedestal cracked and toppled, leaving them all standing in the rubble of their own choices. The morning after my confrontation, I woke with a plan already pulsing in my veins. My whole life, I had been their safety net, the invisible scaffolding propping up Daniel's reckless empire of laziness and lies. They assumed I would never cut the ropes that my desire for their approval would keep me tied. They were wrong. I sat at my desk with the cup of strong black coffee, pulling open a folder where I kept every document, every loan agreement, every bank transfer. Years of emails asking me to co-sign just this once to send a little extra until we get back on our feet to use my credit card because Daniel's got a temporary issue. I had saved them all. At the time, I wasn't sure why some part of me thought I was keeping proof for myself, evidence that I had mattered. Now I saw it differently. It was ammunition. Daniel's biggest lifeline was the lease to the apartment near campus, an expensive unit with a rooftop gym he rarely used and a parking garage where he stored the car my father financed. I had co-signed that lease because without my credit score, no landlord would touch him. Rent was behind 3 months overdue, and every warning email came to my inbox as well as his. My father always promised they'd catch up. They never did. I opened the portal and typed the words with steady fingers, request removal of cosigner obligation and trigger early termination clause. My attorney friend from graduate school had once explained the clause to me over drinks, laughing that no one ever read the fine print but me. Well, now it was going to matter. I hit submit. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with liberation. Next, I turned to the credit cards. Daniel had begged me to open a joint account 2 years ago, just to build history. In reality, it was a funnel for his bar tabs and impulsive shopping. The balance had ballooned, and my parents sent me guilt-soaked texts whenever I mentioned closing it. But that day, I called the bank. I verified my identity, recited the terms, and with a firm voice, I said, "Close the account, effective immediately." The representative asked if I was sure. I had never been more sure. By noon, I was in my office at the firm where I had just been offered a position. I typed up a letter to the student loan servicer. Daniel had used my name as guarantor for one of his business school ventures that he never finished. I informed them formally that all future correspondence should bypass me because I was filing a fraud inquiry. The word fraud burned on the screen, satisfying sharp. If Daniel thought he could bury me in his debts, he would soon realize that soil had turned to concrete. But revenge is not just paperwork. It's theater. It's timing. I called my grandmother, one of the few relatives who had always whispered encouragement in quiet corners, who slipped me $20 bills and told me not to tell my parents. I asked if she was still hosting Sunday dinner that week. She was. I told her I'd be there and that I might bring something important. On Saturday, while Daniel lounged at a bar and my parents shopped for another one of his ventures, I visited the landlord's office. I signed the release papers effective immediately. The manager smirked, almost relieved Daniel's reputation was well known. His keys would be deactivated by Monday. Sunday came bright and cold. The dining room was full, cousins and uncles' plates piled high, laughter spilling over. Daniel swaggered in late, bragging about a car modification he couldn't afford. My parents trailed behind, glowing with pride at his every empty word. I waited until after the roast chicken was carved, until glasses were filled. Then I set my folder on the table with a deliberate thud. "I brought dessert," I said, my tone calm. They laughed, expecting another cake. Instead, I slid out the papers, the lease termination, the closed credit card statement, the fraud inquiry acknowledgement. This, I said, is what failure looks like, not the word on a cake. Real failure, the kind you can't laugh away. The room hushed. My father's face drained of color as he scanned the documents. My mother sputtered, reaching for words that wouldn't come. Daniel grabbed the lease papers, his eyes widening as he realized what it meant. "You can't do this," he snapped. "You're supposed to help me." "I've been helping you my entire life," I replied evenly. "But help is not the same as servitude. From now on, you stand on your own." "You'll ruin me." His voice cracked high with panic. "No," I said, my gaze steady. "You ruined yourself. I just stopped cleaning up the mess." My grandmother's fork clinked against her plate. She smiled faintly, pride flickering in her eyes. Around the table, relatives shifted uncomfortably, whispers starting. My father slammed his hand down, demanding I stop this nonsense, but the power had shifted. The room saw them exposed, their golden boy stripped of his safety net. Daniel's face turned red. "You think you're better than me?" "No," I said softly. "I just know I'm not less." For the first time, Daniel had no retort. He sat back, eyes darting, realizing that his empire of indulgence was crumbling in front of witnesses. My parents looked at me with betrayal, as if I had broken some sacred code, but I felt only release. That night, driving home, I rolled the window down and let the cold air sting my face. The humiliation of the cake was still etched in my memory, but it no longer owned me. I had taken the sting and turned it into steel. Their laughter had built the weapon. Now it was in my hands, and this was only the beginning. By Monday morning, the ripple effects of my decisions began to crack through the surface like ice splitting on a frozen lake. Daniel's first shock came when he swiped his key fob at the apartment building's glass door and the red light blinked back at him. He tried again, harder, slamming his palm against the scanner, but the lock stayed closed. Behind the desk, the concierge didn't even bother to hide his smirk. "Management's orders," he said flatly. Daniel shouted, demanded, threatened lawsuits, but the truth was, in black and white, his lease was terminated. By noon, the locks on his unit had been changed. His gym bag, his gaming console, his piles of dirty laundry all sealed behind a door he could no longer enter. I didn't witness it firsthand, but I heard the aftermath. My phone lit up with messages, first furious texts from Daniel, then frantic calls from my mother, then a short, sharp voicemail from my father. His voice was tight with rage. "Undo whatever stunt you've pulled. This family doesn't betray its own." I listened once, then deleted it. By the afternoon, Daniel was back at my parents' house, storming through the living room, shouting about how I had ruined his life. My father bellowed in agreement. My mother wrung her hands. The golden boy had been pushed from his throne, and suddenly the royal court was scrambling. Neighbors noticed. Relatives whispered. At the grocery store, people asked questions. Why was Daniel back home? Why did he look so pale, so hollow? My parents had always puffed their chests with his supposed successes, but now the cracks were public. The fallout grew worse when the bank letters arrived. The closed credit card account triggered immediate payment demands. Fees stacked like bricks, each one a weight dragging them lower. My mother called me, her voice shaking, accusing me of cruelty. "You know we don't have that kind of money," she pleaded. "Why would you do this to us?" I reminded her that for years that account had been mine to pay, mine to carry, and she had never once asked Daniel why he couldn't handle his own bills. Her silence on the line was louder than any answer. Then came the fraud inquiry. The loan servicer flagged Daniel's file, sending notice that his guarantor me was disputing responsibility. They threatened investigation, demanded documentation, warned of legal consequences if signatures were proven falsified. Daniel raged, throwing chairs, calling me every name he could spit out. But rage didn't erase contracts. Rage didn't pay bills. For the first time in his life, rage left him powerless. Within a week, the family's carefully polished facade collapsed. My father's colleagues, the same men who had laughed at the cake, began to distance themselves. He had bragged too often about Daniel's ventures, Daniel's brilliance. Now whispers spread that the ventures were built on sand, that the son he glorified was no more than a liability. Invitations dried up. Doors closed. My mother stopped answering her phone during the day, too embarrassed to face friends who asked how Daniel's businesses were going. At Sunday dinner the following week, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Gone was the easy laughter. My grandmother sat at the head of the table, sharp eyes observing everything. Daniel sulked in silence, shoulders hunched. My father spoke little, his jaw set like stone. My mother's smile was brittle, breaking with every word. Relatives exchanged glances, unsure whether to ask, unsure whether to pity. The humiliation was theirs now. They tasted it and it burned. I did not gloat. I did not need to. My revenge was not about screaming or throwing fists. It was about exposure, about making them live inside the truth they had always hidden. Every unpaid bill, every reckless decision, every insult they had painted as harmless, all of it now stood under the bright light. The calls to me grew more desperate. My mother begged me to reconsider, promising they would take me seriously from now on. My father threatened disownment, as if the word meant anything when he had never truly claimed me. Daniel sent late-night voicemails dripping with venom, alternating between curses and sobs. And still I stayed silent. My silence was power. The greatest fallout, though, was not in their finances or their reputation. It was in their dynamic. For the first time, my father had to confront the son he had worshipped. For the first time, Daniel had no shield. The house was no longer a palace. It was a prison of blame, anger ricocheting between the three of them. My mother tried to mediate, but her voice cracked under the weight. The pedestal had shattered, and all that remained were shards. Meanwhile, my life surged forward. I signed the contract for my new job, moved into a modest but bright apartment with windows that let in morning light. I furnished it myself, piece by piece, with money I earned. I cooked dinner alone, ate in silence, and felt peace rather than loneliness. For the first time, I was not living as a background character in their story. I was writing my own. Still at night, I sometimes thought of the cake. I thought of the word failure iced in blue and the laughter that followed. It used to make me tremble. Now it made me smile a sharp private smile. Because the real failure had been theirs all along. They had failed to break me. They had failed to see me. And now they were failing each other. The fallout was not finished. I knew more storms were coming. But for the first time, I welcomed the thunder. The calls, the voicemails, the whispers, none of them satisfied my parents. Eventually, confrontation was inevitable. It came on a Wednesday night when I heard a pounding on my apartment door so loud the neighbors peeked out of their peepholes. I opened it to find Daniel flanked by my parents, their faces red with rage and desperation. "You think you're clever, don't you?" My father barked, shoving the lease termination papers into my hands as though I hadn't been the one to sign them. "You've embarrassed this family. You've humiliated your brother." I stepped aside, calmly letting them in, though the tension coiled in my chest. "I haven't humiliated him. He did that himself. I just stopped covering it up." Daniel stormed into the living room, pacing like a trapped animal. "You ruined my life. You destroyed everything I had." His voice cracked a blend of fury and panic. "No," I said evenly. "I destroyed the illusion. Your life was already hollow." My mother wrung her hands. "Laura, please, think of the family, think of appearances. You can't just cut us off like this." "What will people say?" I turned to her voice, steady. "They'll say the truth, that Daniel couldn't pay his bills, that Dad protected him no matter what, that Mom let it all happen. If you're worried about appearances, maybe you should have worried sooner." The words landed heavy. My father's face darkened. "Ungrateful girl," he spat. "After everything we've done for you." I laughed, sharp and bitter. "Everything you've done for me? Tell me, what exactly is that? Was it ignoring my awards? Was it using my credit? Or was it the cake that said failure in front of your friends?" Silence filled the room. Even Daniel froze his mouth open, but no words spilling out. My father clenched his fists, but my gaze didn't waver. "You owe us," he growled. "You wouldn't be where you are without this family." I stepped closer, locking eyes with him. "No, I'm where I am in spite of this family. You tried to bury me and I climbed out. You want to talk about owing, you owe me. Years of stolen credit. Years of belittling. Years of pretending I didn't exist." Daniel slammed his fist against the wall. "I'm your brother. You can't just abandon me." I turned to him slowly. "You're right. You are my brother. But being family isn't a free pass to bleed someone dry. You've treated me like a bank servant a joke. That's not brotherhood. That's exploitation." He sneered. "You think you're better than me because you have a job offer and some fancy papers." I smiled, calm and deliberate. "No, I know I'm better than the version of you who refuses to grow up. And guess what? The world knows it now, too." My mother gasped softly as though the words pierced deeper than any scream. My father shook his head, muttering about betrayal, about how children were supposed to honor their parents. "Honor." I repeated, my voice low but cutting. "Honor goes both ways. You never honored me. You mocked me, dismissed me, used me. You wanted obedience, not respect, and now you have neither." The room felt electric, heavy with truth. For the first time in my life, I wasn't shrinking under their voices. They were shrinking under mine. Daniel lunged forward, his finger jabbing toward me. "You'll regret this. When I rebuild, when I succeed, you'll come crawling back." I tilted my head, meeting his fury with calm. "Daniel, you've never built anything. And if by some miracle you ever do, it won't be on my back. I'm done being your foundation." My father tried one last tactic, his voice booming. "You'll end up alone, Laura. Families forgive, outsiders don't. When you need us, we won't be there." I stepped closer until only inches separated us. "When I needed you, you weren't there. When I achieved, you weren't there. When I begged for recognition, you weren't there. So tell me, what exactly will I be missing?" The silence that followed was suffocating. My parents exchanged glances, their anger deflating into something else. Fear, maybe realization. Daniel's face was red, his hands trembling. Finally, I opened the door. "You should go," I said quietly, "because if you stay, you'll only hear more truths you don't want to face." They hesitated, but the weight of my voice left no room for argument. My father stalked out first, my mother trailing behind with tears in her eyes. Daniel lingered for a moment, his chest heaving. Then he spat on the floor and stormed into the hallway. I closed the door, slowly locking it, leaning against the wood as my breath steadied. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from release. I had spoken every word I had swallowed for decades. The confrontation had not broken me. It had broken them. And deep down, I knew this was not the end. It was the beginning of their collapse. Collapse doesn't come all at once. It creeps in inch by inch until the foundation can no longer hold. For my family, the cracks had been spreading for years. My actions only sped the inevitable, pulling away the supports they had relied on. And then, like a storm hitting rotten wood, the whole structure gave way. The first blow came from the landlord. With the lease terminated, Daniel had nowhere to go except back to my parents' house. For years, that house had been a shrine to his so-called brilliance. Photos of him in Little League uniforms, his half-finished college certificates, framed as if they were diplomas, newspaper clippings from minor mentions he insisted were press features. But now, the shrine became a cell. Every morning he woke to the sound of my father's voice barking about responsibility, every night to my mother's tears about money. Their golden boy was suddenly just a grown man, sulking in his childhood bedroom, the glow stripped away. The second blow came from the bank. The closed credit card account triggered collections. Agents called daily letters arrived with bold red lettering. My parents, once smug about their good standing in the neighborhood, now whispered over the phone, pleading with creditors to buy time. But creditors are not swayed by pride or excuses. They are swayed by numbers, and the numbers were stacked against them. The third blow was the fraud inquiry. The student loan servicer flagged Daniel's records, escalating it to potential legal investigation. The word fraud followed them like a shadow. My father's colleagues heard it, his boss heard it, and soon invitations to golf outings and dinner parties vanished. For a man who thrived on appearances, the silence was louder than any scandal printed in a paper. And then came the whispers in town. Neighbors noticed Daniel lingering outside with nothing to do, smoking in the driveway. Relatives shared hushed gossip after church, wondering aloud why I, the one with the stable future, was absent from family gatherings while Daniel was suddenly back under their roof. My mother stopped going to social functions. My father's temper grew volcanic, his voice booming through thin walls, arguments spilling into the yard where others could hear. It all came to a head one evening when I received a call not from them, but from my grandmother. Her voice was steady, almost too calm. "Laura, she said you should come by. They're unraveling. Someone needs to witness this." I hesitated, but curiosity pulled me back to the house I had once called home. The driveway was cluttered with unpaid bills, shoved into the mailbox, envelopes bulging. Inside, the air reeked of stale beer and burnt food. Daniel was slumped on the couch, eyes bloodshot, muttering about how everyone was against him. My father sat rigid at the table papers spread before him, his hands shaking as he tried to balance what could not be balanced. My mother hovered between them, her voice rising and breaking as she pleaded for peace. "You should have stopped her!" Daniel shouted when he saw me. His face twisted, spit flying. "This is all your fault!" I didn't flinch. I looked around the room, the chaos, the ruin, and felt only clarity. "No," I said. "This is the result of choices. Yours, theirs, choices you all made while laughing at me." My father slammed a fist on the table. "You've destroyed us." I leaned forward, my voice calm but sharp. "I didn't destroy you. I revealed you. There's a difference." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the tick of the wall clock. My mother sank into a chair, her face pale. Daniel buried his head in his hands. For the first time, I saw at the collapse not just of finances, not just of reputation, but of the story they had told themselves for years. The story that Daniel was destined for greatness, that I was just a shadow. That story was gone. In the weeks that followed, the collapse spread further. My father was quietly removed from a committee at work. My mother pawned jewelry to cover bills. Daniel lost what few friends he had left, their patience exhausted by his endless excuses. The house grew quieter, darker, like a mausoleum of broken pride. And me, I thrived. I signed my work contract started at the firm and poured myself into cases that valued precision and resilience, the very traits my family mocked in me. My colleagues respected me. My supervisors noticed me. The word failure no longer clung to my skin. It became a ghost I had exorcised. One night, as I walked home from the office under the glow of city lights, I thought about collapse, about how it had to happen for anything new to grow. My family's empire of lies had fallen, yes, but from its ruins I had built something stronger, something mine. Still, I knew the final chapter wasn't written yet. Collapse was only part of the story. There had to be an aftermath, a reckoning, a moral, and when that came, I would be ready to speak it aloud. Months passed, and the storm finally settled into a dull, steady drizzle. My parents' house stood the same from the outside, but inside it had changed beyond recognition. Where once there had been laughter at my expense, yes, but laughter nonetheless, there was now only silence punctured by the occasional clash of voices when bills came due or when Daniel raged about his future. The pedestal they had built for him had crumbled into dust, and all that remained was resentment. I, on the other hand, felt lighter than ever. My new apartment had grown into a home. The walls carried no echoes of scorn, only the hum of possibility. I filled it with books, plants, and photographs of people who celebrated me, not diminished me. On Friday evenings, I invited colleagues over for dinner. We laughed, shared stories, and toasted to victories large and small. For the first time, I felt a sense of belonging that had nothing to do with blood and everything to do with choice. Still, there were reminders. At the grocery store, I overheard hushed conversations about my family. Such a shame, one woman murmured near the produce aisle. They put everything into Daniel and look how it turned out. Another shook her head. And that daughter, she's the one doing well now. I suppose the tables do turn. I walked past with my head high, not out of spite, but because I no longer needed their validation. Their words were proof of what I had always known: truth surfaces eventually. My grandmother remained my quiet ally. She came to visit me one Sunday carrying a tin of cookies and her sharp wit. Sitting at my kitchen table, she said simply, "You did what needed to be done. They may never admit it, but you've freed yourself. And sometimes that's the only justice we get." Her words sank deep, comforting, and true. The real turning point came unexpectedly. One evening, I received a letter from my father. Not a text, not a voicemail, but an actual handwritten letter. His handwriting was jagged, almost desperate. He apologized not for the years of neglect, not for the cake, not for the debts, but for letting things get out of hand. He asked if I would consider helping for the sake of family unity. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer unopened again. I didn't respond. Because forgiveness, I had learned, is not the same as reconciliation. I could forgive them in my heart, let go of the weight of their cruelty without stepping back into the fire. Boundaries once set are not a prison. They are freedom. Daniel tried too in his own clumsy way. He showed up at my office building one afternoon, waiting outside as I left. His face was gaunt, his voice quieter than I had ever heard it. "Laura," he said, "I need you. Just one more time." I looked at him, really looked at him. The boy who had once been held up as the family's shining star now dimmed to a flicker. I felt no anger, only clarity. "Daniel," I said softly, "the best thing I can do for you is nothing. Maybe without me to rescue you, you'll finally learn to rescue yourself." His eyes filled with tears, but I walked away, my heels clicking against the pavement like a metronome of resolve. Life moved forward. My work flourished. Promotions came, not because I begged for recognition, but because I earned them. I began mentoring younger women in the firm, women who reminded me of myself, quietly competent, overlooked by louder voices. I taught them the lesson my family had refused to teach me. Your worth is not measured by who applauds you, but by what you build when no one is watching. And so here I stand looking back, not with bitterness, but with strength. The cake that once spelled failure was in truth a prophecy they wrote for themselves, because they failed to nurture, failed to see, failed to respect. But I did not fail. I endured. I rose. The moral is simple, but it burns like fire. Sometimes the people who should lift you will try to bury you. Sometimes the loudest voices at the table are the most wrong. But justice has a way of finding its path not always through courts or headlines, but through quiet revolutions, through boundaries drawn and dignity reclaimed. To anyone listening who has ever been called less than, who has been humiliated by those who should have loved you, remember this. Their words are not truth. Their laughter is not destiny. You hold the pen. You write the ending. As for me, my ending is not loneliness. It is freedom. It is Friday dinners filled with real joy. It is Sunday mornings with coffee and silence that feels like peace. It is work that values me, friends who see me, and a life that belongs only to me. Failure Gnome. I am living proof that sometimes the greatest revenge is simply thriving. When I look back, I don't see that cake anymore. I see the strength it forced me to uncover. Family betrayal is one of the deepest wounds a person can carry, especially when it comes dressed as tradition or favoritism. But what I've learned and what I want you to take with you is that dignity is not something anyone can hand to you or take away. You claim it, you protect it, and you live it every single day. If you're over 50, maybe you've carried your own version of that failure cake. Maybe words spoken decades ago that still sting, or choices your family never respected. Please know it is never too late to set a boundary, to rewrite the ending, and to live in freedom instead of shame. Justice doesn't always come with a gavel. It comes when you stand firm in your worth and refuse to be silenced. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever faced betrayal from the people who were supposed to love you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And tell me where you're watching from tonight, because this channel is building a community of people who understand each other's pain and strength. If this story spoke to you, please tap that like button, subscribe, and share it with a friend. Together, we'll keep telling the stories that prove one thing in the end: dignity always wins.